She was 23 years old, a refugee who had escaped war, a young woman who believed she had finally found safety in a new country. But on a warm August evening in Charlotte, North Carolina, her story ended in one of the most shocking crimes the city had ever seen. This is the case of Iryna Zarutska, a life full of promise, cut short on a quiet train ride home. To understand what happened that night, we need to start with who Iryna was. Iryna Zarutska was born in Ukraine. In 2022, when Russia's full-scale invasion plunged her homeland into chaos, she fled. Like millions of others, she was displaced almost overnight. Leaving behind friends, family, and a country at war, she made her way to the United States. Charlotte, North Carolina became her new home. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe, or so she thought. Friends describe Iryna as resilient and driven. She had found work at a local pizza restaurant. She was taking English classes. She talked about one day becoming a veterinary assistant, a career that would allow her to combine her love of animals with her determination to build a stable life in America. Those who knew her say she always smiled, even when things were difficult. She missed Ukraine deeply, but she believed in her future here. On the evening of August 22, 2025, Iryna boarded the Lynx Blue Line light rail in Charlotte. It was just another ride home, part of her routine. She found a seat, likely tired after work. To her, the train represented a chance to unwind for a few minutes before stepping back into her life in the city. But sitting a few rows behind her was a man she didn't know. His name, DeCarlos Brown Jr. Within minutes, the calm of the train would be shattered. Passengers later described the attack as sudden and incomprehensible. Without warning, Brown stood up. In his hand, a small pocket knife. Before anyone could react, he lunged toward Iryna, stabbing her multiple times, including a fatal wound to her neck. The entire assault lasted seconds. Chaos erupted inside the train as horrified riders screamed for help. Emergency calls flooded in. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but it was too late. Iryna Zarutska was pronounced dead inside the train car, the same place she had once seen as a safe and predictable part of her new life. The suspect, DeCarlos Brown, didn't flee. He was arrested almost immediately on the platform. The news spread quickly, first across Charlotte, then across the country, and eventually across the ocean to Ukraine. For many, the story felt unbearably cruel. A young woman who had escaped bombs and violence overseas, murdered in a country she had chosen for its promise of safety. As the shock settled, the questions began. Who was DeCarlos Brown? Why had he done this? And could this tragedy have been prevented? In Part 2, we'll look closer at the man accused of killing Iryna Zarutska, his long history with the criminal justice system, his struggles with mental illness, and the charges that could bring him the death penalty. Stay with us. In Part 1, we learn the story of 23-year-old refugee Iryna Zarutska, a young woman who built a new life in America, only to be killed on a Charlotte light rail train. In this second part, we turn our attention to the man accused of murdering her, and the bigger questions this case has raised about crime, mental health, and public safety in America. The man arrested for Iryna's murder was 34-year-old DeCarlos Brown Jr. From the outside, Brown's life looked like a story of failure and frustration. He had been arrested at least 14 times before the stabbing, charges ranging from robbery to burglary to weapons violations. His rap sheet painted a picture of a man who had been trapped in a cycle of crime for most of his adult life. But what troubled his family most wasn't just his criminal record, it was his mind. Brown had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. According to his mother and sister, he had been in and out of treatment, often refusing to take his medication. His mental health worsened after he was released from prison in 2020. His family described terrifying delusions. He believed there was some sort of chip implanted in his body, that material was controlling his thoughts. He would isolate himself, talk about voices, and lash out unpredictably. To them, this was a man who needed help, but instead he found himself bouncing between jail cells and short-lived hospital stays. On that August evening, those untreated delusions would explode in the most violent way possible. Witnesses say Brown did not know Iryna. He did not exchange words with her. There is no argument, no robbery attempt, no motive that could be understood in the traditional sense. The stabbing appeared to be completely random, the kind of violence that chills a community because it feels so senseless, so impossible to predict. Police arrested Brown on the train platform within minutes of the attack. He was calm, almost detached, as officers took him into custody. Very quickly, prosecutors filed charges. At the state level, Brown faces first-degree murder, a charge that carries the possibility of life without parole. But the case didn't end there. Because the killing happened on a public mass transit system, federal prosecutors stepped in as well. They charged Brown with causing death on mass transportation, a crime that can carry the death penalty under U.S. federal law. That escalation means Brown's case could become one of the most significant federal murder trials of 2025. For Iryna's family, the legal details were overwhelming. Her uncle spoke to the press, describing her as a girl who had survived the war only to die like this. He said the family was devastated, trying to raise money to send her body back to Ukraine for burial. The Ukrainian community in Charlotte organized vigils, holding candles and carrying photos of the young woman whose life had ended so abruptly. Around the world, Ukrainians voiced horror at the idea that someone who had survived the Russian invasion could meet such an end in America. But beyond grief, the case raised troubling questions. How secure are America's buses and trains? In many U.S. cities, light rail systems operate with little or no security presence on board. Charlotte's Lynx Blue Line, where Iryna was killed, has been criticized for weak enforcement of fare collection, limited surveillance, and a lack of police visibility. Local officials acknowledged the incident highlighted major gaps in transit safety. How does a man with a long history of severe schizophrenia and violent criminal behavior end up free on the streets? Unmonitored, untreated, and carrying a weapon. Brown's family claimed they tried to get him consistent treatment, but the system failed them. Advocates argue this case is a textbook example of how the U.S. often treats mental illness as a law enforcement issue, not a healthcare one. What does justice look like in a case like this? For some, the federal death penalty is the only fitting punishment. For others, executing a man with severe mental illness feels less like justice and more like another failure. As Brown awaits trial, the community continues to grapple with these questions. Charlotte officials have promised to review transit safety policies, but for riders, the fear lingers. And for the Ukrainian community, Iryna's death has become a symbol of the fragility of safety and of the cruel irony that someone who escaped war could fall victim to random violence in the place she thought was her refuge. Iryna Zarutska should have been remembered for her dreams, her love of animals, her determination to build a new life, her courage in leaving behind everything she knew in search of safety. Instead, she is remembered for the brutality of her final moments. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about violence, about mental illness, and about the systems meant to protect us. On a summer evening in Charlotte, a train ride turned into a nightmare. And for one young woman, the journey that was supposed to mark a new beginning ended in tragedy. For Iryna Zarutska, there will never be justice enough to fill the loss. But in telling her story, perhaps we can remember more than just how she died. Perhaps we can remember how she lived, with resilience, with hope, and with dreams of a better tomorrow. Please go to the comments section to share your thought on this case with us.